A trend that I've noticed in my work with neurodivergent clients is that many of us feel frustrated because we haven't achieved our aspirations or life goals by a certain age. Now, granted, a lot of these aspirations or milestones that we think we should be hitting are often shaped by the majority in our society. That is, people who are not neurodivergent, people who aren't queer, people who are centered, and their narrative is the one that defines everybody else's. Their life goals become our life goals, which if you are, for example, neurodivergent, you're going to struggle maybe to drive at the same rate as other people. Developmentally, a lot of us experience some form of impairment. And so I know I took until I was probably 26 before I got my driver's license. And I see that with many neurodivergences, they're delayed, for example, in basic kind of milestones like that. I say basic in that it's expected as a rite of passage of adulthood is that you get your driver's license in your teenage years, but for me it was delayed by like 10 years. And we are facing structural oppression and disadvantage. We don't live in an equitable society, so achieving those goals is a lot harder for us because we don't have the support, but we have extra struggle as a result of our neurodivergence. And many of us also happen to be queer, so having a family, getting married and having kids by a certain age is going to be a lot harder, especially when you're trying to date other queer people. And many of us have attachment issues as a result of being marginalized, and there's higher rates of attachment issues among marginalized populations. And then even having kids, if you're, for example, two gay men, you have to find a surrogate because we can't incubate children. And that requires finance. And raising a kid already is pretty expensive without having to go that route. So it gets very frustrating because we're holding ourselves to this standard, which I often think is arbitrary because it wasn't shaped for us. It was shaped by other people who don't have the level of challenge or haven't experienced the level of structural oppression that we have. So for us to then internalize that, it's hard not to when it's projected all across society, in our media, in conversations, relationships, what's verbalized between people. When we internalize that, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And human beings, as a general rule, tend to compare ourselves to other people. It's this upward and downward comparison. We do it to elevate ourselves and make ourselves feel better, and also to aspire to achieve a certain standard or a goal. And so it is a universal human thing, but I think neurodivergents do this a lot because we're always checking why we're behind. We're noticing the difference between where we are and where others are, for example, our age, or from our backgrounds. And we're like, well, they were able to do it. Why can't I do it? What's wrong with me? And because you're the common denominator in all these things where you're lagging, you assume that you are the problem, that it's an inherent failure on your behalf, that you're lacking some inherent quality or trait that you need to succeed. And yes, for example, many of us experience executive dysfunction, which can impair our ability to plan, initiate, and follow through on goals. So we might be delayed as a result of that. But when you stack up challenges like this, it gets more and more incrementally difficult to achieve these things. So many of us might not have our career, might not have our partner, might not have our friendship group by, let's say, 30. And we expected that we would by then, that we would be all settled. I have noticed in my life that it's probably fairer if you have marginalized identities like neurodivergent, queer, if you're a person of color, to set those milestones back by about 10 years. No joke. I feel it's fair only to go, well, if I'm facing these struggles, I should give myself leniency and say, with grace, 10 years, I'm 10 years behind developmentally. Let's say that. That's what I like to say when I phrase it to myself, for various reasons, that I have multiple, marginalized identities. So if I haven't achieved everything I want by 40, well, what were my expectations for 30? Have I achieved those? And setting, the parameters back a little bit to give yourself the grace necessary to not self-criticize and persecute and shame yourself and feel like a failure. And many of us, when we approach those life milestones, certain ages that we perceive to be the age by which we should have done X, Y, Z, we start to feel this growing sense of failure, and that we are a loser, and that nobody likes us, and what's the point living? And, you spiral and you question. And you don't pause to go, well, let's factor in all this other stuff and let's do the math, and realistically, is it fair to expect that I would be at this point? And when you do, you can be a lot more self-compassionate and go, well, like my path is uncharted. It's uncharted territory. I'm trying to figure out my way moving forward. And I haven't had a lot of help. I haven't had any guides. I often haven't had any mentors. And I'm just making this up as I go along. So value that you are at where you are at this point, even if it isn't fulfilling your expectations, it's remarkable that you've gotten this far without that extra assistance or guidance. Most people have it already planned out for them, and they can do it with ease because they didn't have to struggle, and their life path is already delineated by society and social expectations. So there's that downside, but there's also a plus side in that we get to choose our destiny. We get to shape our own lives, and we get to pick. We don't have to follow those paths, hit those milestones that are socially prescribed. We can define our own. So maybe you might not have a life partner, but you have a wholesome community in which you engage and feel loved, and you feel accepted and understood. Maybe that could be your life goal, right? Maybe you might not have a home, but maybe you have a group of friends for whom, when you spend time with them at their home, it feels like a home for you. We might have material objectives that are hard to achieve because we can't get great jobs because we struggled in school or whatever reason. So try to factor that in. And like I said, put the goalposts a little further back by like 10 years and be graceful and self-compassionate towards yourself. Treat yourself with the kindness and mercy that you would somebody else who was also facing the same level of challenge. And be kind. Be kind to yourself. Don't jump on this criticism bandwagon that your brain's wanting you to jump on. Try to look at the bigger picture, zoom out, and see yourself in your environment and how much your struggle or where you happen to be might be a byproduct of your specific neurotype in the environment in which you're growing up. An environment that is often ableist and structurally oppressive. Have you struggled with achieving certain milestones? Have you found yourself shaming, guilting, criticizing yourself for doing so? Have you felt like a failure in the past because you weren't able to hit a certain goal that you were expecting to hit? I would love to hear from you.